All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone has a delicious meal in front of them, and that this delicious meal is something that will help you in the learning process. I want to welcome everyone to the first of a series of IEC Lunch and Learns on building decarbonization, or more commonly known here in Chicago as the Clean and Affordable Building Ordinance, or CABO. That's a mouthful, but that's why we use CABO as the acronym. My name is Danny Robles, and I will be your host for this Lunch and Learn on clean affordable buildings, the argument for our climate. We will also be having topics on this issue later on in September in regards to cost savings and jobs and economic impact. So make sure you sign up for next ones after this call. We will drop that information at the end of this. But before we get started, I do just want to go over a few community agreements. Please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions or make any comments. All questions we will be taking into consideration at the end of the presentation. So feel free to ask away. We will save those questions for the end of the presentation. So folks will, our panelists will be able to answer those questions for y'all. Also, please keep yourself on mute while the presenters are speaking. We do have that option available at the end of the call too. If you feel more comfortable asking the question coming off mute, we welcome that as well. But the final thing we do ask everyone is to keep comments civil. If there's any uncalled or any comments that are just perceived as rude or not relevant to the subject, we may have to remove people from the session, but I think we're all really good at this. So let's get started on this. Before we fully jump into this, I do want to talk a little bit about IEC, or the Illinois Environmental Council. Since 1975, IEC has worked to safeguard Illinois, its people, its plants, animals, and the natural systems in which all life depends on by building power for our people and the environment. We represent over 100 environmental organizations operating in Illinois, and IEC carries its mission to advance public policies that create healthy environments across Illinois through education, advocacy, and movement building. And this is part of our education platform, is making sure that we bring folks the information that they need for the bills that are coming up. Now, I want to introduce our panelists today, or our presenters. Today we have Madeline Semanisin, who is the Midwest Building Decarbonization Advocate with the Natural Defense Council. Madeline has a vast amount of experience through her work in environmental environmental justice communities who have experienced lead contaminations in their schools and communities. Throughout school, she also was an organizer in making sure to get lead out of the school drinking water. She passed an act in Missouri against drinking water. So she comes with a lot of experience to do this work, and we're really excited to have her leading this charge on building decarbonization in Illinois. And alongside her, we have Tessine Murji, who is the conservation organizer with the Illinois Sierra Club based here in Chicago. She manages a lot of different programs, including the federal lobby team, to make sure that our Illinois delegation is consistently hearing for volunteers on Sierra Club priorities. And she also runs the Chicago Group field team, where volunteers meet once a month to partner with organizations like ours to make sure we're taking action during some of the biggest things that are impacting our planet. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Madeline and Tessine to do any further introductions about themselves or the work that they do. Madeline?
Thanks, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Danny said, my name is Madeline Semanisin. I'm with NRDC. And at NRDC, I oversee our involvement in 3 gas rate cases before the Illinois Commerce Commission. And I also oversee our building decarbonization work happening in Michigan alongside my colleagues. So it's great to be here speaking with you all today.
Hey everyone, like Danny said, my name is Tessine. I work with the Illinois Sierra Club. I mostly do organizing work here in Chicago and federally as well.
Perfect. And with that, we'll turn it over to Madeline to get us started on building electrification.
Great. Thanks, Danny. So once again, hi everyone. Today, I'm really excited to talk about an important strategy in the battle against climate change, which is cutting emissions from our building sector. Cutting emissions from our building sector will create a more sustainable and healthy future for us and our planet. Go to the next slide. Great. So buildings play a pivotal role in the challenge against climate change. They contribute significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions due to their energy consumption for various functions such as heating, cooling, and lighting. A report done by Princeton University reported that cutting emissions from the building sector is a crucial part of our strategy to hit net zero emissions by 2050, which I'm sure we're all aware of is necessary to prevent the most catastrophic events of climate change. So we must act in the building sector if we want to have a more livable and healthier planet. So commercial buildings in particularly, but also residential, emit really harmful pollutants into the atmosphere, such as particulate matter, VOCs, nitrous oxides, and sulfur dioxide. And these emissions originate from two main sources. One, by consuming electricity generated from dirty fuel sources at power plants. So how the electricity moves through the buildings or the energy, so from coal-fired power plants or gas plants, or by burning fossil fuels on site. So for instance, your gas stove, your gas furnace, to run heating and cooling options in your home. And so these emissions go beyond just the environment, even though they are really detrimental to the environment, and they create poor outdoor air quality that creates severe health problems, including respiratory issues and cardiovascular issues. So people could have more asthma attacks or just be more irritant when they go outside to those environmental stressors. And it also, unfortunately, affects our indoor air quality as well, which is really concerning because we spend over 90% of our time indoors. And it's been reported in Illinois that 20% of childhood asthma is attributable to gas stove usage. And we now learned from a recent Stanford report that even when gas stoves aren't on, they could be leaking benzene into our environment, which is a known carcinogen. So it's important that when you are using those equipments that you properly vent and use a ventilation system that puts that toxins outside, but also when you're ready, to switch off your gas stove to help with those health issues. And it's really important in a city like Chicago, where a staggering almost 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our building sector. So a huge portion of the city of Chicago's issues in fighting climate change have to be solved in the building sector. And so I would argue for us to hit our climate goal that's laid out in the Chicago Action Plan, which is a 62% reduction in carbon by 2040, we must act, and we must act within reducing emissions in our building sectors. So how do we do that? Let's go to the next slide. It's really the leading way that NRDC and others argue of hitting this goal is through building electrification or building decarbonization. And so building electrification refers to replacing gas furnaces, boilers, water heaters, stoves, and dryers with highly efficient electric appliances that can run on 100% clean energy, alongside other efforts of reducing energy waste in buildings. So switching to these electric heating systems and appliances powered by pollution-free electricity could cut US carbon emissions by 1 billion tons annually. So it's a huge opportunity for us to address these emissions and really get us in line with our climate goals. And I know people argue, well, why must we start now? The electric sector is not completely 100% renewable. Well, while we are rapidly moving in that right direction, we must start now in the building sector, because appliances and just the building stock, what's put in place today, will be here for decades. And so if we don't start today, starting to switch over these appliances, For instance, your gas furnace can be in your home for 20 years, and that gets closer and closer to that 2050, 2040 metric. So we really must act now because of how long these systems stay in our homes and just also how damaging they are to our health. There's also, so those are the key aspects of building electrification. So it's really switching over these appliances and HVAC systems with highly efficient electric uses. So for instance, switching your furnace and your AC with a highly efficient heat pump that can cool and heat your home, or for cooking appliances, switching to an induction cooktop stove instead of your gas furnace, instead of your gas stove. And so building electrification also has a lot of social benefits. It can be very transformative for low-income communities and communities of color, which are already disproportionately experiencing the damaging effects of climate change and high utility bills. So switching to highly efficient and cleaner energy sources will reduce the overall energy needs, which then would correlate to lower energy bills, but also improve indoor air quality. And this is super important in the city of Chicago. We have some of the highest gas bills in the Midwest. As most people are aware, this January, all three gas utilities, and especially People's Gas Utilities for Chicago, filed for a rate increase to increase our utility bills and for natural gas usage. And the issue is, especially in Chicago, we have some of the highest fixed charges, which means before we even use our gas furnace or a gas stove, we are charged each month just to upkeep that really expensive infrastructure that's super dirty and that we eventually need to transition off of. So we've heard from many of people that they struggle to pay for those gas bills, which then leads to making Illinois #1 in the country for gas disconnections, which is a scary statistic because if you don't have the power to heat your home, other things can go wrong. So building electrification is a great solution and a really critical policy that we need to cut emissions from our buildings. And so what we are proposing in the city of Chicago and what we're working on, and we'll go to the next slide. Sorry, do I have control of that? And so I'll keep talking. So what we are proposing is the Clean and Affordable Building Ordinance package, which, as Danny said, is CABO, because it's a mouthful. And these are two policies that are under the umbrella of building electrification. So the first one, and in no particular order that we are proposing, and so that's, ICJC, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, is working on these policies. Other organizations are working on these policies also with the city of Chicago. But the first one is the building performance standard. So to start, in 2013, Chicago adopted a building energy benchmarking ordinance to raise awareness of energy usage in existing buildings over 50,000 square feet. So this is just the floor of knowing what your building's energy needs are, what you're currently using, and it just gives information to the building owners and the general public. So the next step, usually when a city passes a benchmarking ordinance to get that data, is to move into a building performance standard, also known as BPS. So this establishes specific efficiency performance levels that buildings must meet to encourage individual building owners' action to improve efficiency. So that could be anything from weatherization of these buildings, changing out the lighting, all the way to changing out your HVAC system to making it more energy efficient and not as polluting as much carbon or greenhouse gas emissions into the environment. So where we are right now is we are working with the city of Chicago to propose a working group ordinance that would establish a 20+ working group from people in the environmental community, EJ communities, affordable housing communities, and utilities, and also folks from government to work together to put forward a building performance standard that then they will then send to the mayor's office, and he must then take those recommendations, create a BPS, and then introduce it by Earth Day of next year, because the city of Chicago has pledged to have a BPS by Earth Day of 2024. So that's the building performance standard and the CABO package. There's also the new construction ordinance, and that is another tool that we use in the building electrification space. It's working specifically with building codes. that mostly impact new construction. So the SDC, the city is potentially proposing an ordinance that sets a indoor emissions standard, and it's specifically 25 kilograms or more of carbon dioxide per BTU. And so basically what that means is this combustion limit permits the use of zero or low carbon emission technologies, including building electrification technologies such as heat pumps, while limiting the use of fossil fuel-based appliances and systems. So this is not similar to what's going on right now in Berkeley. If you're familiar with Berkeley, Berkeley passed a quote unquote gas ban that did not allow gas hookups in the city of Berkeley. What our ordinance is, it's an indoor emission standard. So it is appliance neutral on its face, but it is such a low emission standard that it doves nicely to really just encouraging building electrification. So this, we believe, will pass the legal scrutiny and won't have the same issues as the Berkeley ordinance. So just wanted to flag that in case some folks are aware of that. And there are some exceptions to this new construction ordinance, such as hospitals or similar healthcare facilities. But widely, this would impact all newly constructed buildings, single family, multifamily, commercial, etc., or any building that goes any kind of major renovations, with major being the threshold of like 25% of the area from pre-construction, pre-renovation of the area. And so while we understand that there are not that many compared to existing buildings in Chicago, that new buildings are a small segment of the building stock, we believe, and it's important that we draw a line in the sand and say, this is where we are starting that transition, because like I've already said, these building equipment inside these buildings are going to be on the books for decades to come before they are replaced at the end of their shelf life. So it's really important that we start now in this transition. And then just my last slide, just to talk about quickly, how do we prepare for this transition? So with building electrification, we will need to make improvements to our grid. And so I always say that there are two main components on how we prepare for this transition. One is using energy efficiency technology. So for instance, heat pumps are a great way to heat and cool our home. And an RMI study has reported that today's grid in Illinois can already serve 12 to 25 times more heat pumps that are currently in operation. So it's a simple idea that we need our equipment to do the same amount with less energy, and that is possible through equipment such as highly efficient heat pumps. The second point to this analysis is also that advocates like myself are not arguing that we turn off the gas switch overnight and flip the switch to all electric clean buildings. We're just asking for the process to start and have an integrated planning process that plans the future of what we need the grid to look like. Because we argue that it's really the only way to make this transition to hit our climate goals. And with that, I will pass it back to Danny or to Tessine. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Madeline. Next slide, please. So passing a building performance standard or a new construction ordinance isn't new. We're not the first people here in Chicago trying to pass something like this. Major cities like New York and Boston have recently passed building performance standard ordinances. In Boston, their buildings over 20,000 square feet are set to meet emission targets by 2025, and they are set to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And in New York, similarly, buildings greater than 25,000 square feet are assigned an annual emissions cap. And their bill is interesting because it sets progressive benchmarks. So they are set to meet certain goals between 2024 and 2029, and then even higher goals between 2030 to 2035. Next slide, please. So like Madeline mentioned, one of the many reasons why we need to pass both of these policies in our Cabo bill is because gas rates are insanely high. They have become increasingly unaffordable, and they are set to become even more unaffordable. So People's Gas, our gas utility here in Chicago, would like to increase our gas rates by $402 million citywide. And these rate hikes are approved or denied by a regulatory committee called the ICC. At Sierra Club, and I know a lot of folks on this call have been sending volunteers or testifying themselves with the ICC here in Chicago and in Springfield against these rate hikes. And there's actually an opportunity to submit witness slips as well, which I would like everybody here to do if possible. Danny, can you put the link in the chat? So if you hit this Google document and click on the link in the headline, it'll take you to a website where you can submit a witness slip against these rate hikes. And the Google Doc has some instructions or just a little bit of advice if you need help crafting a statement. I personally think it's totally fine to write something along the lines of, this is really bad, like inflation rates are already skyrocketing, climate change is real, and hit submit. I just think they need to get like a lot of constituent and consumer protest while informing their decision. And that's it for me.
Thank you both for giving us an insight look of like what building decarbonization means here in our city, across the country, and what is currently happening, and what the bill actually is proposing. So I think at this point, we're going to turn over to some questions or preguntas. I think I saw earlier in the conversation, Linda G asked if there are any talks about city-owned electric distribution.
That is not something that I'm aware of. I can, if anyone on the call is aware of that, please feel free to answer.
I can try to take a stab at this one. I believe that there was a study done a couple years ago to identify whether we can municipalize the electric distribution, and just looking at the numbers, it would be a pretty costly thing for the city, up to like several $billions to one, separate our grid from the rest of ComEd's grid to own the electric distribution. That just the city doesn't have that kind of funding to be able to do at this current juncture. So I think with that, the city actually just signed on to an additional franchise agreement with ComEd. It's a lot shorter than the 30-year contract that we had been under, but at this point in juncture, the city isn't looking to own the electric distribution. Thank you, Molly. 15 years, which half the lifetime of the last franchise agreement, still too long, but it's definitely a costly endeavor to try to take on the electric grid. Any other questions? Folks, feel free to raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. Jeff Boyle, I see you with your hand raised.
Yes, hi. Thank you for hosting this webinar. Question for you on the plans to basically prohibit any additional use of fossil gas, methane gas in new construction here in the city, either at the commercial level or new residential construction. Has any of that been considered?
Yeah, so thanks, Travis. If I'm understanding your question right, the new construction ordinance does apply to residential and commercial. And so it is fuel and energy source neutral on its face, but with such a low emission level set for indoor air quality, it's really going to be hard for those fossil fueled appliances to comply. So it's mostly going to be beneficial electrification equipment in those homes. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question.
No, that's terrific. And in fact, I've heard a lot about the gas industry trying to block or preempt ordinances at a local level. Is this a way to get around that essentially by setting standards that are so tight that you essentially have to move off fossil fuels in order to meet them? Is that part of the strategy?
That's exactly right. So this is what New York City did with the indoor air quality instead of like the Berkeley method of just being, for preemption reasons, for just, favoriting different types of appliances. So not doing a gas ban, but just a neutral emission ordinance on the face of it. And then basically knowing which ones can comply with that standard. So it's just part of the strategy, and we've seen that success happening in other states like New York.
Awesome. Terrific. Thank you.
And I also believe Oak Park just recently passed one as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question. I see a couple more questions coming in the chat. Carrie Ross asks, can you please speak to the importance of the makeup of the new building performance standard working group? Tessine or Madeline, y'all want to take a stab at that one?
I can try. I've been on the subcommittee of the ICGC BPS Working Group, and so it was really important for our coalition that we had frontline communities and also affordable housing advocates at the seat at the table, because there is some concerns that the cost of these upgrades would just pass through to tenants or residents of those affordable housing units, or would affect certain communities. So to make sure that voice is on that working group was really important to us. And also to have a equity-centered organization, as well as other experts in terms of like the building staff, building sector, and what would need to happen. So really having a holistic approach. We're hoping that that will make a equity-centered recommendation that the mayor can then use to create the BPS.
Yeah, and I also think it could serve as like an accountability body in a lot of ways. We passed the Chicago City Climate Action Plan that has like robust standards that we want to meet. And if we have like a group of people who are aware of these things and holding the city accountable, it's just another body that can do that.
Perfect. Thank you. I also want to uplift not a question, but an interesting website that Joseph Ms. Amara put together. There is a website that ranks all the Chicago buildings in terms of their efficiency. So folks, feel free to take a look at that website. There's one more question from Linda G. How would electrification programs be implemented?
For new construction, it would be through the building codes. So when a builder needs to build a new build or also just renovation, they have to pull building permits to comply with certain standards. So there are safety standards, just certain provisions that are put into building codes. So that's how the electrification or emission reduction neutral programs would be implemented that way. For BPS, since it's still a working group, I'm not exactly sure what the working group will recommend, but in other places, there's like a compliance pathway that builders, if they were over a certain 50,000 square feet or above, they would have to submit their plans on how they are going to reduce their emissions, and then they can be penalized if they don't hit a certain emission reductions by a certain date. So it would be through the builders. And then in some places, for instance, St. Louis City has a building performance standard, and they have a buildings hub where builders can go and help figure out how they can reduce their emissions and be connected with contractors and other programs to help reduce those emissions in those buildings.
Perfect. The questions keep coming in. So thank you all for sending those questions over. We will make sure we have plenty of time right now to get those questions answered. So any more questions come in, feel free to send them our way. I also want to remind folks that this is being recorded. This will be on IAC's website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you think this is an important conversation that other people need to hear but weren't able to come today, please feel free to share that to other folks, as well as letting them know of the action steps they can do. So our next question comes from Rachel Fredericks, and it's a follow-up to the question about the Building Performance Standard Working Group. Have there been any effort to get public health professionals on there or informed by best practices relating to ventilation and filtration to reduce airborne pathogens, akin to the ASHRAE standard?
We have submitted a request for that to be added. We understand the importance of the healthcare perspective in drafting the BPS. I also know that they are appointing people from city staff that might have a health background. But since I should say, we still have not seen the final language from the city, and we will circulate once we see that language. So right now we have asked for these, but we have not been told the final language from the city yet of what they plan to introduce.
Our next question comes from Molly Graham. Does anyone have plans on educating the general public on electric service upgrades needed to support full building electrification? Folks need to understand there are costs beyond just installation of new equipment. Molly, that is a great question, and we hope that you can join us at our next Lunch and Learn on September 12th, which is titled The Cost of Building Electrification, where we will be diving deeper into that question and making sure we do educate the general public. I think that's also part of the work that this working group is working through is communicating that information out to the mayor's office to have a game plan to talk to the general public of why we need building electrification and all the components behind it. Any additional thoughts on that, Madeline or Tessine?
Yeah, just to add, so I'm part of the ICJC Cabo Grassroots Working Group, and we are putting on a series of listen, lead, share events around the city. We recently hosted one with the Citizens Utility Board. They are experts on these kinds of things. They can answer almost any question about costs and incentives and everything you need to know about heat pumps, so on and so forth. We did one in Maria Haddon's ward recently, who is our climate champion in city council for this ordinance. And we have one coming up in wards 40 and 47. If you're interested in putting on one of these listen, lead, share events in your ward, I can put my email in the chat and we can meet about it.
Yes, I see Linda is raising her hand to help set one up in 10th Ward. To see you and I can work with Linda and see if we can help set that up as well. I think we've had a lot of great conversations with other people up in the north and northwest side, but we definitely need the support from anyone who's got connections to the other people down the south and southwest side of Chicago. We're currently having conversations with Alderman Ramirez, Cleo Ramirez down in McKinley Park, who is on board, but definitely can use additional support. Any other questions or folks? Oh, we have one word that just came in from Joseph. Some cities like Ithaca, New York are trying to decarbonize every building to attain 100% carbon-free city. I think I heard one of the presenters say that we're pursuing a building performance standard in Chicago that isn't entirely carbon-free. I'm curious why this is the goal instead of going for zero emissions. Is it more realistic goal for our size? Question.
Thanks, Joseph. So right now, since we are just proposing a working group, the working group would set the agenda of what they want the BPS to accomplish. So I personally hope that it's carbon free, right? But it has to go through that process, and they're going to research with what our building stock looks like, what's feasible. Like I said, there's going to be people from the Builders Association probably on it, to utilities, to environmental advocates. So there will be a lot of discussion on what this BPS should look like. And I think different groups are going to lean different ways. But so unlike New York, where they introduced an actual like framework that had a carbon emission reduction or carbon emission goal, ours is introducing just the working group, and then the working group is going to work out those details, and then a BPS would have to be introduced then once again through city council next spring. So it's a two-step process that's happening right now in Chicago.
Thank you. And then I see a question from Carrie Ross, and I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on your answer. Carrie asks, can you talk more about the racial disparate health impacts of the gas system in Chicago and how these policies will help close that gap?
I don't know any number specifically beyond the fact that it exists, and that our southwest sides have some of the highest asthma rates in the country, and that gas utility appliances are a huge contribution to that. In order to make this ordinance as equitable as possible, we are hoping that this ordinance creates a clean buildings community hub, in which community members can get access to financial and technical assistance, so they can also share in the building electrification benefits.
Perfect. Thank you. I think I see just a couple comments. One from Dolores Pino that states that this building decarbonization ordinance should be, or specify that should be nuclear free as well. We 100% agree with you, Dolores. I think that there's work for us to do on that front. I think we're doing some of that work at the state level to make sure that as we are, decarbonizing our energy system, that we're taking into account renewable energy as the number one priority. Some people might argue nuclear is renewable, but I think for a lot of us in the advocacy space, we have a hard line against that. Great. Any additional questions from the public? Great. Well, first off, I want to thank Madeline and Tessine for being here with us and being the experts on the subject matter. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today at this Lunch and Learn. In the chat, you've been seeing some information on upcoming Lunch and Learns. Our next one is going to be on the North Shore Mosquito Abatement District, September 7th at noon. So feel free to sign up for that. But if you're still interested in learning more about the real cost of clean buildings or what this means for our jobs future here in Chicago, make sure you sign up for the other deep dive clean building discussions happening September 12th and September 22nd. And additionally, we will be circulating information on sending your alderperson a message to make sure that they are being an advocate and a leader in the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance. We're anticipating that this will come up in City Council in the next month, so we really need to come at this with a strong set of other people willing to step up. And finally, make sure that you support IC's work. Become a member today with a $50 donation. Paloma's just dropped in the chat. There's a special t-shirt for all new members this summer. So make sure you sign up for our summer membership. The funding that you do helps provide the resources that we need to make sure that we continue providing these educational resources and connecting people to the legislators in making the impact that we need for our environment. With nothing else, I would like to thank everyone for their time today and hope that you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon and stay cool out there in these warm summer days.